Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the ongoing pandemic, and climbing inflation. Those are just some of the big issues that President Biden touched on during his first State of the Union address. The president trying to calm the fears of many Americans who are both exhausted and anxious. But did it work? NBC News correspondent Blayne Alexander joining us now from outside the state capitol. Blayne, always a pleasure for you to join us. I understand you just spoke with some voters here in Georgia about the President's State of the Union and much more. Yeah. Can you fill us in on what they thought about his speech and whether their biggest issues were addressed?
Sheba, so good to see you as always. And yeah, I did speak with 3 voters just hours after the State of the Union address. Let me tell you a little bit about those voters. They're Georgia voters, but more specifically, Black Georgia voters. And that's an important block when it comes to Democratic support. So one is a small business owner here in Atlanta. The other, a voting rights advocate, somebody who spent countless hours in 2020 registering people to vote. And the third is a single mother who waited for hours to cast her vote during the 2020 primary. So all of them are invested in some way. They say overall, they liked the tone of the speech. They say that it was a unifying speech, something that they really enjoyed, but they did want to hear more specifics. Here's a little bit about what they told me. Take a look. Just show of hands, who was satisfied with what you heard?
Voting rights. I cannot emphasize enough that we did not hear that. That was 1 minute. I remember timing it and just hearing, oh, you've checked that box and now you've moved on.
He touched on, I have 2 sons, so police reform is very important to me. I'm hearing about teenagers that literally don't want to get their driver's license or drive out of fear.
And Sheba, of course, voting rights, something we've heard a lot about here with the new voting law. That was something that all 3 of them touched on in some form, and they say that they'd wished that they had heard more from the president about the protection, as they say, of voting rights. Sheba.
Really interesting there, Blayne, when you asked them who was satisfied, only 1 raised their hand. The latest poll numbers show the president's approval rating at 41%. How do Georgia voters feel about his job performance?
Kind of on par with what they said about the speech. I asked a couple of them on a scale of 1 to 10, what would they give the speech? A couple of them said 8. Another person said a 5. But they kind of recognized that of course, President Biden has limitations when it comes to getting a whole lot of things into a finite amount of time. So they were more forgiving on that front. They also said that when it comes to the midterms, it's not going to dampen their enthusiasm any. Even though they wanted to hear more specifics, they're still going to go out and be enthusiastic about their support when it comes to the 2022 elections. Here's a little bit more of our conversation. Take a look. How satisfied are you with the job he's doing so far?
As far as the job, I'm a little disappointed because I felt like people have increased their prices on childcare, making it inaccessible to those who have multiple kids. And my sister just passed, so I just adopted my nephew here, and now I find that people are overpricing, price gouging, and then you find childcare facilities are overcrowded, not following COVID protocols per se.
So Sheba, again, 3 Georgia voters here, not a scientific sample by any stretch, but certainly interesting to hear their very fresh and very raw perspective after listening to the State of the Union. I've got to say, I asked them, how many of you were listening with a critical ear? How many of you were taking notes? They said that they were all taking notes, all had very specific things they wanted to hear. So certainly very in tune when it comes to what they wanted to hear and following all of these events, Sheba.
All right, Blayne Alexander, thank you for bringing us their perspective on this day after the State of the Union. And much more on the president's first State of the Union, plus continuing political coverage tonight on Nightly News with Lester Holt at 6:30 right here on 11 Alive.